You may know that the Russian word for aspect, vid, has other meanings too. Отсюда прекрасный вид на океан. And it makes sense that we use this word, vid, to talk about aspect, because even though many books and some of my videos introduce aspect by talking about repeated actions versus one-time actions and so on, the choice of aspect is not always objective. It often reflects the speaker's point of view in a given context. Are we thinking about the action as a whole, or zeroing in on some details, maybe the beginning or end or the results of an action? The thing is, if your native language doesn't express aspect in the same way as Russian, it may be hard at first to know what the Russian speaker's point of view would be in a situation. So let's look at some common real-life situations to begin to get a feel for this. We'll start with some simple questions and answers. Ты когда-нибудь читал Анну Каренину? Читал, пару лет назад. Вы сегодня видели Сашу? Нет, не видел. Да, видел. Он работал в библиотеке. Вы когда-нибудь брали в машину в прокат? Брали, когда мы были в Италии. Ты слышал об этой школе? Да, слышал. Мой знакомый изучал там французский. We use the imperfective in these questions since we're just wondering if the action took place. There's no particular connection to the present moment, no details about how or when or why it happened, no specific result that we care about. We're just talking about whether it happened or not. And it's normal to answer in the same aspect since the context is the same. We're just stating whether the action happened. Sometimes this context applies when one person didn't know something has happened. Будем завтракать? Нет, я уже завтракал. Вот у нас служебный роман. Будешь смотреть с нами? Нет, я уже смотрел этот фильм. You're not talking about whether you finished your breakfast or watched the end of the movie. Here, we're just naming the action as a whole, saying that it happened and nothing else. That's our point of view in this context. Let's look at another example in a very short clip from this classic romantic comedy, Служебный роман. Shura is collecting donations for a colleague, and she's not so sure whether Tolia has paid up or not. So what do you think, which aspect will she use? Imperfective, платить, or perfective, заплатить?
А вы платили?
Я платил.
Платили?
Платил.
They both use the imperfective платить because the question is whether or not he's paid. They're not talking about details of how much or when, just the fact of whether the action happened. It's common to see the imperfective used when checking whether something has happened or not, even for a one-time action. And here's an interesting point. Sometimes the point of view can change even when we're referring to the same action. To make this clear, we'll be looking not at fragmented sentences, but some short dialogues in contexts that show how and why the point of view is shifting. For some of these next examples, I've taken inspiration from Живая речь, which has one of the best introductions to aspect. Let's say it's time for the World Cup. You might ask, кто вчера играл? Играли Аргентина и Германия. Let's stop right here. Was the game played to the end? Was it completed? Well, probably, and we can assume they only played one game, so why imperfective for something that happened once and is done? Here it's because of the speaker's perspective. We're just naming the action as a whole with no thought about the end of the game or its result or any specific details. It just happened. Now we could go on to say, они сыграли в ничью. And here we do use the perfective, talking about the same game, because now we're zeroing in on the result, giving detail about how it ended. Here's one more example. Где ты была сегодня утром? В кафе я писала письмо. Я сейчас иду на почту. Ты уже написала письмо? Да, написала. Вот. In this answer, the imperfective tells what the speaker was doing in the morning. There's no mention of a result, so we don't know yet whether the letter was finished. It's just not important in this context. In the second part, we're still referring to the same action, writing that same letter. Why perfective now? Because the context has shifted. If we're going to the post office, we do want to know whether the letter was completed. And in the answer, we see perfective because of this same context. I've finished the letter, so you can take it. The result matters. So the action hasn't changed, but the speaker's perspective has, from activity to result, and that's what often determines the choice of aspect. To get a feel for this, it really helps to work through a lot of these examples in context. Живая речь is excellent for this, and it can be purchased online as a PDF. I should mention there's no commercial connection here. I just like their approach. In any case, be sure to pay close attention to the context for choice of aspect whenever you hear or read Russian. Summing up, the choice of aspect in Russian often depends on context and the speaker's point of view. That's why, even though we talk about perfective for one-time actions and imperfective for repeated actions, we do also hear the imperfective for an action that happened once, most often when the point is just whether the action happened or not, and when there's little or no additional context.